started. Thank you, everybody, for coming to today's public meeting of the Outdoor Lighting Code Committee. I know it's been a minute since we've met, so thank you all for making the time to be here and to hear the direction that we're going. And we're going to go ahead and get the meeting started with roll call. I'm Amy Oliver, Chair of the committee. We'll just go down the list. Craig.
Present.
Craig Barron is present. Dennis Kuhn.
I'll just do roll call really quick
Okay.
for the record.
Okay.
It is November 20th, 2024, and we are at 9:03 a.m.
Recording us as you usually do.
Yes. Yul Januzzi,
I'm here, and I'm one of the people representing astronomy on the Outdoor Lighting Code Committee.
Amy Oliver,
Present.
Dennis Kuhn, Robert East,
Present.
Daniel Slater, Miranda Jackson,
Present.
Craig Barron,
Attending.
Alex Zimmerman.
Present.
Chair, we have quorum. We have 5 present, 2 absent.
I think we have 6 present.
Wait.
7 present.
No,
Well,
6 present,
Six.
6 present, 2 absent. And we do have a few new committee members. If we could just get them to introduce themselves. That would be Robert East, Miranda Jackson, and Alex Zimmerman. If you could please introduce yourselves.
Rob East, Pima County, City of Tucson resident. I work in the development community. My background is architecture and it's been in development for about 25 years. So,
Alex Zimmerman, I'm an electrical engineer. So I work in the design community. I own Zone and Technical Engineering. I've been working in this industry for about 12 years, so excited to join the committee.
And Miranda?
Morning, my name is Miranda Jackson. I work at Tucson Electric Power in the public improvement project manager in the resource management team. So been in this position about 1.5 years. Prior to that, civil engineering from University of Arizona.
Chair, I think it's only fair that the old timers also introduce themselves so the new members know who we are. I'm Gil Januzzi. I'm a professor of astronomy at the University of Arizona. I was director of KIPP before that. So involved in the Tucson community now for 40 years and been on the Outdoor Lighting Code for 20, close to 30.
I'm Amy Oliver. I'm the chair of the committee, and I work for the Fred Lawrence Whipple Observatory, which is part of the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, and I fill the dark sky advocacy slot.
I'm Craig Barron. I'm a former lighting rep, retired now, thankfully, representing the general public of Tucson.
Thank you all for being here. Just a reminder to everybody in person and online with us, please state your name for the record before talking so that we can make sure that we capture who's speaking. Take it away, Chair.
All right, well, so if everybody have a copy of the agenda, go through it from the top. So our first item, our first order of business today is an introduction to the lighting consultant from Fisher Marantz and Stone. And so I'm gonna hand it over to Clayton and let him start that introduction.
Morning, thank you, Ms. Chair. As some of you may know, some of you may not, Pima County in the city of Tucson procured a lighting consultant to assist primarily the subcommittee in the technical aspects that may be necessary or called upon by the committee in order to facilitate the update of the 2012 Outdoor Lighting Code through a few different potential vendors. The Fisher Marantz Stone was selected and has been with us for a few weeks now. They are just beginning their work. And I would like to turn it over to a representative that we hopefully have online. Looks like we have a spinning wheel of death, but I'm hoping they can still hear us. Can we hear from Katie or Charles?
This is Charles. I'm Charles Stone. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm a founder of Fisher & Stone. I'm the Stone, and I've been involved in lighting design for almost 50 years, and I'm still at it. I love what I do. We are lighting designers, and we have experience, which I think is relevant, and it's experience all over the world in all kinds of projects. It's been an exciting time in lighting the last 15 years as everything has changed. You've all heard about LEDs. I think this group is pretty knowledgeable about that, but there's much more than that. The whole way we practice codes and standards have changed in the US and all over the world. Controls, understanding of the effects of electric light at night on flora and fauna and people too, and astronomy, is greatly increased in the last decade. So it's an exciting time and an appropriate time, and we're grateful that we have been asked to help you navigate what is a really interesting challenge to update a set of codes and regulations that everybody needs to be able to use and use efficiently. On the call, one other thought, I have a personal stake in this because my wife and I, 12 years ago, we purchased a place in the foothills, and we are spending about half our time here, and eventually we'll spend more here, I think. So I'm very fond of Tucson, and in younger years did a lot of river trips and walking in the desert. So I'm very keen on a lot of these issues. With me on the call is one of my colleagues who's Katie Zub. Katie, you should introduce yourself. She's been with us about 11 years and is extremely respected, well respected within our firm as a go-to technical maven, and she's a great designer too, and a really nice person. Katie?
Hi everyone, Katie Zub with Fisher & Stone. As Charles noted, I've been with the company for about 11 to 12 years, and I'm excited at the opportunity to help keep Tucson beautiful and respectful of the night sky.
Thank you for the introduction. As was previously stated, they have already started some preliminary work. As part of the initial contract negotiation, the stakeholder comments that were collected earlier this year through the open public comment period were shared with them so that they could try to come up to speed on what has been voiced throughout the community and in our process thus far. And so I believe they have a few bullet points that they would like to share as their initial findings, assessment of what they have heard from the community, with the intent that this is a learning session, right? We want to make sure that they accurately understand the challenges and the concerns and the priorities. And so with that, we're gonna.
Excuse me, Clayton, but
Yes.
before you do the presentation, could you describe what charge they've been given?
Yes, absolutely. And Dan, please feel free to jump in here. I know Dan with Pima County has also been instrumental in the procurement of that contract. But essentially, their charge was to identify potential options for us to address the concerns brought up by the stakeholders.
So the concerns as documented by the response to the last presented draft.
Correct.
Nothing else has been provided to them yet.
Correct.
Can I just state for the record that Dennis Kuhn has joined us at 9:09 a.m.
And apologies, Chair, to step off of the agenda, but to go back, all of the committee members have had an opportunity to introduce themselves. Perhaps we could allow Dennis to do the same.
Thank you.
I'm Dennis Kuhn. I'm a electrical engineer in Tucson and time to time design out sideline.
And also the vice chair. All right, thank you. Go ahead, Clayton, go ahead, continue.
So Katie or Charles, would you like to share those initial thoughts?
Charles, you're on mute.
The most common phrase in Zooming is you're on mute. I'm Charles Stone again. I hate to read to people slides, but it's worth noting that we did review a great lot of stakeholder comments and are very sympathetic to the challenge of adjusting the wording in the code, perhaps the basis of the way things are written, so that it can be applied in a more straightforward manner. And so our initial thoughts are that we should reconsider the lumens per acre approach to the code. I won't read you all the text. You can read, I'm sure. The challenge here is that nobody in the world designs on a lumens per acre basis. So you're adding a layer of complexity with the lumens per acre approach to how the design community, whether they're electrical engineers or lighting reps or lighting designers such as ourselves, how we actually approach a design problem. And that's only one of the reasons, but it's in the interest of simplification, it's worth reconsidering. The second one, light trespass. Well, speaking broadly, light that's pointed up or on your neighbor's property is light that is really not useful to a user. It's going somewhere else. So why pay for it? Why do it? Why have it? So light trespass is a key issue in dealing with not only dark skies, but being a good neighbor, and in the new concerns in the anthropogenic human-caused light pollution. Light trespass is an even bigger umbrella than dark skies and light pollution. It's the whole idea that you should only put light where you need it. And the third point here about color temperature, all the research that's been done now in these last couple of decades is teaching us that, in short, warm colored light that appears warm, is better for every living thing at night. How interesting. And a placeholder for this is CCT. That stands for correlated color temperature, a cumbersome metric, but it is what we are using now in codes, because defining it otherwise is even more complicated for a user, whereby everybody understand when you say warm light or light that's more like candlelight. So it turns out this is good for everybody. So these are things that ought to be considered in any code rewrite or adjustment. And so we think they're the top three, you might say. I think that sums it up. Katie, would you add anything to that?
Katie's I agree that these are our main takeaways from the comments that we had received. There is additional consideration for additional layers of controllability, which we understand may impact the overall allowance for light, whether it be lumens per acre or a different approach such as an illuminance level. But in terms of the main takeaways from the commentary, these three were what we had initially thought were the top items.
Go ahead.
Rob East, was there a tally done? It sounds like you guys were tasked to go through all the public comments. I see three that you brought up as initial thoughts. It's been a while since I read those. I read quite a few in regards to safety. I don't see that on the list. And is there a tally that, you know, there's 5 about safety, there's 15 about light trespass, or how have you guys quantified the concerns of the Pima County citizens?
Charles Stone speaking. What's not written here is what I did comment on earlier, which is that any engineer or lighting designer working for the university or the city, the public, or a developer, or even a homeowner uses a performance-based approach. The touchstone for this is the IES handbook, for example, in the US. That's the Illuminating Engineering Society. So in answer to your question about safety, when you design a project, if you're dealing with a parking lot or an entrance to a building, a porte cochere where you drive up and drop off your car at a hotel, the light levels are essentially, they're not necessarily prescribed, but they're strongly recommended in the best practice, which can be found in the IES handbook. So that's all in front of this. So any professional you hire to do lighting design is already using a performance-based, illuminance-based approach to lighting. So it's kind of a given. I guess it's a given. It's not optional. If somebody falls down in a parking lot and somebody gets sued, these items are not what the judge, what's in the lawsuit. It's about how many foot candles there were on the parking lot. So it's a given that the performance-based approach is going to be used by everyone. Does that answer your question?
I get all those things. I'm going through a major site lighting design right now, so I understand all those things. As a person, I don't know if the general populace of Pima County understands all those things. When you reference these code books, you know, the IESNA, are those readily available, and what the recommended foot candles are?
Absolutely.
Okay, they are. All right.
Yeah.
So it's not just for you know, developers and architects and astronomy. I mean, there's a small landowner that may go and do a lighting upgrade for their project. Okay, they're not going to go hire a lighting designer or necessarily an electrical engineer to take care of that for them. They would be going to a vendor or something. So, you know, you can put a lot of technical terms in there, but at some point it's sort of got to get, pardon my French, but dumbed down a little bit so that others can understand it.
Well, you're absolutely, Charles Stone speaking again, you're absolutely right. And one of the stakeholders clearly has to be a single family dwelling, a residence. And I wouldn't call it, not necessarily dumbing down, but a simple approach. I mean, again, our initial thoughts refer to that, because what we're most concerned about, I think pretty much unanimously in this group, because what I didn't say is Tucson is quite a special place for a number of reasons, including the gaggle of telescopes that surround us, and the relative low population and connection with the land that everyone has who spends any time here, mean that, for example, light trespass, the big thing with your neighbor as a small landowner, a single family dwelling, the guidance needs to be related to light trespass as much as anything else.
And hang on just a second, we're gonna let Buell just cut in here for a second. He
Yeah,
has
I've
some
been trying
questions.
to get in. I want to reassure Rob, because the question he asked, what he started with, this is Buell Genesi, what he started with was asking, is there a tally of comments? And I appreciate, first, I also want to say, it's very nice to meet the new consultants, but to reassure Rob, that public comment period was on one draft. There have been many comments over the last few years as we've been trying to update the code in response to the changes in technology, in response to the new sign code and everything else. And one of the things that has delayed the latest revision, and why we welcome all the help from the consultants and the public and everyone else, is that with the limited resources that the city and county have for enforcement, it's incredibly important that the code have buy-in from the entire public. One of the things I love about Pima in the city of Tucson is they have one code that they share so that a business person or a resident doesn't have to figure out which part of the city or county they're in, which code is it. It's one code. And we do everything we can to make it easy for people to comply with the code because there isn't the resources to go around and fix things. If you do something wrong and then you have to pay money to fix it, that's hard. If you can understand the code up front and do it right the first time, which most people want to do, that's what we want. So it's incredibly important. I strongly support what you're saying. It's not dumbing down. Having clarity in the code so that people can comply with it is incredibly important. And I understand we're getting into the weeds already, but my understanding from the city and county was today, the consultant was being introduced to us. And today is not the only day that there's going to be opportunity for everybody to give comment to them and to the outdoor lighting code committee. Thank you.
Yeah, and sorry, so this is Amy Oliver again, I'm the chair, so I want to reassure everyone that, so these are initial thoughts right now. And it's important to us to make the code accessible. Right, and so actually Clayton is going to give a presentation just here in a little bit about where we've seen things go right and where we've seen things go wrong in other codes around the country, so that we can be learning from those, so that as we are growing as a community, we have that opportunity to continue to make our code accessible to everyone, because we do have issues with education and enforcement, and then the long-term changes as we continue to grow. So we want to make it as easy to use as possible. And so there's a lot for us to consider. So this is the first time a number of committee members are actually seeing these initial thoughts. And so we're going to have plenty of time to consider what's being said. And Clayton, go ahead.
Thank you. This is Clayton with the city of Tucson. I also just wanted to respond to Mr. East's comment as far as a tally. I will say that as Mr. Januzzi brought out, the stakeholder comments that were sent to the lighting consultant were just the last round of comments. And I would also like to say that there were a number of repeat comments sent from multiple individuals that had the same text. So I'm not sure how that tally or
Recording's back up.
Yeah. Okay, we're good.
Okay. That's Cheryl.
Thank you everyone for your patience. We're just having some technical problems with new technology. It's always nice to get new technology until it turns against you. And so before we move on to the next section of the agenda, so I want to clarify again, so what we were talking about before we needed to take a pause was vote tallies. And for Rob, I'll clarify for you as well that we've been working on this for a very long time, for over 7 years on this version. So these issues that Charles has brought forth are not unknown to this committee. The community has had a significant amount of input over a long period of time, so that we are firmly aware of where these issues are. And I think we can get you the notes from past meetings, so you can see where these have come up. And we've had like a full room as well of people expressing where they have had impingement and difficulty in actually using the current code. And so we'll get you all of that as well. All right, so let's go ahead and right ahead.
This is Dan with Pima County. Rob, I just wanted to add that I don't want to speak for the city, but I can speak for the county. The majority of our lighting complaints deal with these 3 initial thoughts. So
On the complaint side.
on the complaint side, yes.
Thank you for that clarification too, Dan. And so why don't we go ahead now just to kind of keep things on track, so we get everything we need and then have a lot of room for the call to the audience today. Let's go ahead and move on to that next item on the agenda, which is our discussion on the intent and priorities of the outdoor lighting code.
This is Clayton with the City of Tucson. So as an opportunity to ensure that we are all speaking the same language and making sure that we are directing the lighting consultants in a path that meets the intent of the community and the committee, I thought it appropriate to have an agenda item just to talk about the high level purpose behind our lighting code relative to the different stakeholder interests. So I'd like to open it up to anyone that might like to start that discussion.
Yeah, if you don't mind, so this is again Amy Oliver. I'm actually gonna turn to Buell here, and since Buell has I think some of the longest time on the committee, and also to Craig, and let you guys kind of talk about some of that history. Well, and Dennis, I can't see Dennis.
What do you mean you can't see that?
You're on call.
So as Charles Stone said, light that goes up doesn't help anyone. So the outdoor lighting code is an attempt to enable all of the lighting that people need, and people need lighting at night. We need it for safety, we need it for events, we need it for lots of reasons. But to minimize the undesirable impact on wilderness, fauna, and on a major industry in the state of Arizona, astronomy. In Southern Arizona is one of the world's centers for astronomy because of our dark skies, our educated workforce, and the ability to do forefront science and research and education in this environment. Last year, an economic assessment by an independent consulting firm assessed the economic impact of astronomy in Southern Arizona at $560 million a year, 3,300 jobs. So we are one of the businesses and industries, as are all the developers, are all the other people in the area that have a stake in trying to find win-win solutions. And what I love about the current code is it's the product of that. And what started the most recent revision, which is still not over and it's no longer recent because it's been going on for too long, was an attempt to adapt to the new technology of LEDs. Because the code that was adopted in 2012 built in that we knew what the fixtures were. We knew what was available for the designers to use. We knew how they would decay with time. We knew things about it, and that was incorporated in what we were anticipating a particular decision on the lumen cap or something else would lead to. LEDs are different, and we wanted the code to adjust and live up to the new technology, and we also had certain fixtures not available anymore. So I'm gonna, since I'm not a designer or somebody knowledgeable with the pictures like Craig and Dennis, I'll stop now, but I hope you're gonna add something about that part of the perspective.
Sure, this is Dennis Kuhn. So for the 2012 edition, the predominant light source that was being put in this town was high pressure sodium, which has a relatively small amount of blue spectrum light in it compared to other sources. We also have lighting zones that are geographically based to protect the observatories. And as you go into those zones, the amount of light that you're allowed to use decreases, and more relative to even high pressure sodium, there was a advantage to using low pressure sodium light. The low pressure sodium light was an advantage to astronomy because it was essentially monochromatic, a single wavelength, and was easy to filter, and was already a very warm wavelength that is not reflected back through the atmosphere. That light source is simply not available anymore for new construction, even for maintenance. The lamps aren't being manufactured anymore. But the other thing that happened was the change to the LEDs and the spectral difference in the LED. And that's what we've been trying to reconcile. Getting this update, that's been the fundamental work that our subcommittee's been doing.
Been working on for Craig Barron, and working on for quite a while now. We've had some distractions, we've had some other outside interest want to have a say, so we just have not been able to narrow down our final draft to give to mayor, council, and a board of supervisors. So it's taken some time. Yeah, we were real close, but just not quite there. So that's what our hopes were as a committee, that this consultant would be able to change ever so slightly our numbers as they were, and still adopting the lumens per acre. Because, you know, granted, we're the only ones to do that, at least probably in the United States, but nobody in the United States has 74 telescopes surrounding it either. So we are an outlier. We are something different. And so that's why we have this, because it better quantitates based upon the location of that developed area, what we can use.
Thank you, Craig. Again, this is Amy, and that's a really good point that we have a number of observatories in those observatories. So to clarify, we're going to have multiple telescopes on them, and that's what he's talking about, is that individual observatories, for example, Kit Peak and Whipple Observatory have dozens of telescopes in operation on them. And so there's a lot of research that impacts not only our economic base here in Arizona, but an economic base and our state as the, you know, a dark skies center and astronomical center of the world here in Arizona, happening on these sites, because they're not just research for the University of Arizona, they're research for worldwide organizations going on here. So that's attracting a lot of dollars and interest and care into our economy.
And did Bill not say it was $560 million
A year.
a year?
And
That's just the University of Arizona.
that's just them. That's not all.
So
Just the
that-
University of Arizona.
it is,
Yeah,
It's not billions, but it's close to it.
It quite substantially more. I mean, so there's also Kit Peak has its own economic impact, and then Whipple has its own economic impact as well. Mount Lemmon and Mount Bigelow are University of Arizona. Of course, Whipple also has the MMT, so it's sort of.
And it's not just Southern Arizona.
All of Arizona.
All of Arizona. Lowell Observatory just dedicated a new visitor center, nature tourist attraction. It was a $40 million investment. Also, it had investment from the state legislature. The reason Flagstaff and Lowell were able to secure that kind of support is because they're one of the few cities that is better than we are at protecting their dark skies.
They are really good.
And there are peripheral businesses that support all that, private businesses.
Right.
It's not just governmental entities running telescopes.
That's right. Astronomy is not just people looking at things and trying to understand how they work. It's also people developing new sensors or UV sensitive cameras that are used for quality control in the semiconductor industry, or imaging satellites that might not be our satellites. So there are lots of things that are connected to this. And then we haven't talked about all the other reasons people like to have well-designed, aesthetic, controlled lighting. It makes your home and city beautiful. It allows you enjoy nature. So for all these reasons, the code is a way for us to work together to protect the things we value.
And this is Amy again, and I don't see, anyone here from the, Sky Island Alliance. I don't see anybody online from that either, but, so I'll speak on their behalf today, but also part of the outdoor lighting code, that is becoming more and more prominent and important as time goes on is also our commitment to protecting nature. So you brought that up just briefly, but as science gets better and learns more about what's going on in nature, we're actually understanding, for example, a number of your plants, your food plants, for example, bean plants are a good example, rely on REM sleep. They sleep at night. And if they don't get to sleep because lights are shining on them, our food quality goes down. That's very important in Arizona. And also our bees. So we're talking pollinators like bees, moths, fireflies, what we rely on here to keep our desert blooming and healthy, also rely on darkness as well. And so that's an important thing that we're also now needing to consider. As we're thinking about how do we control that lighting so people get what they need. But then also prioritize keeping our ecosystem healthy, because we have, for those in the room who are unaware, the Sonoran Desert is one of the most ecologically diverse places in the world. And that is why we remain healthy even through our dry spells or really wet spells, is because of that. So we have to start to learn to also balance that into the conversation. And so it's just important that we're doing that. So remembering that the original intent, fuel of the lighting code was to protect the observatories. That's why we have our lighting zones the way they are.
So that was a definitely major one, but it wasn't the only one. The other stakeholders, the reason that the Outdoor Lighting Code Committee has the distribution of skill sets, lighting designers, if the code was just to satisfy astronomy, you'd have a 7-member astronomy board, right? It's our job to do the hard work of figuring out how to do the win-win solutions.
As Chairman, I have a question.
Please state your
I-
name for the record.
Dennis Kuhn. I cannot remember, but I know that going way back, 1980s, 1990s, when I think it was 1980s, perhaps earlier, when the Outdoor Lighting Code Committee was first formed. I believe it had a charter of some kind that had a stated goal. And I believe that stated goal was fundamentally to protect the astronomy in our region. And anything else other than that is perhaps not truly the goal of this committee. But in part of doing that, the committee was set up with certain categories of members so that there'd be a broad representation. It's not just observatory interests. It's also construction interests, it's general public, it's business interests, et cetera. And I think that is represented in those of us that are now members of the committee. But I hear an awful lot of things veering away from that original purpose. And so I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. Unless that has changed and I'm ill-informed. I don't think it has.
No, I mean, it's actually, sorry, this is Amy. It's still listed on our website. So it actually reads, this could, is it okay with everyone if I go ahead and read this? It's off the City of Tucson website, for our committee. The Outdoor Lighting Code Committee is a collaborative effort between the City of Tucson and Pima County, working to preserve night sky visibility and support local astronomy. This committee makes recommendations to mayor and council, as well as the Board of Supervisors on the Outdoor Lighting Code, with the purpose of preserving the relationship of the residents of the City of Tucson and Pima County to their unique desert environment through protection of access to the dark night sky. Intended outcomes include continuing support of astronomical activity and minimizing wasted energy, while not compromising the safety, security, and well-being of persons engaged in outdoor nighttime activities. It is the intent of this code to control the obtrusive aspects of excessive and careless outdoor lighting while preserving, protecting, and enhancing the lawful nighttime use and enjoyment of any and all property.
Mr. Chair, this is Clayton with the City of Tucson. I would like to also point out that section 101.3 of the current outdoor lighting code is the purpose and intent. Many of those themes are replicated, but should the committee decide for whatever purpose that the true intent of the code needs to change, I would also highly recommend that focus is given to the intent statement in the code, as that is the driving force behind much of the regulation.
So this is Buell. I actually think Dennis and I agree. We had slightly different emphasis. You're right. It's obvious from that statement, astronomy was in people's minds when they created the code. But what I was trying to acknowledge is we're not supposed to harm other interests. That's very explicit too.
Yep. Okay, are there any additional comments or questions about our intent and priorities?
Mr. Chair, I would just recommend that we check the chat to make sure that there's no other additional comments online.
If you guys,
Just a brief moment.
that I actually saw a comment about the IES standards that was rolling by that we'll need to address at some point, but those are behind a paywall. So those are not readily accessible. So in order to keep the code accessible, that's a concern we will have to address. Okay, so I don't see anything directly. If you have an opportunity, if you'll roll through again before we get to the public call, then we can call out those people who have direct questions when we get there. All right, so I think what we'll do is we'll move on to the next part of the agenda. So I will hand it over now to you, Clayton, for your presentation on other lighting regulations.
Thank you very much. Just a moment while we pull up that presentation. And I would like to preface this with this presentation is only intended to be a very high level view of how outdoor light is currently being regulated in different regions. It is not intended to be a model for any of our updates, but more as a stimulus for the conversation necessary to hone in on what may need to be improved, what may need to be changed, and or what may need to be avoided. Okay, looks like that presentation is coming up now. So on the next screen, if you notice on the upper left-hand side of the screen, we have 6 bullet points that loosely generalize categories that are commonly found in outdoor lighting regulations meant to reduce the negative effects of light pollution. The first bullet, intensity or brightness, is meant to limit the brightness of exterior lights and typically leveraged to limit the amount of light at individual fixtures. This tool can use several methods of limiting intensity via total lumens per fixture, or maximum foot candles, or lux, or illumination. It should also be noted that there are different methods of measuring the intensity of light. It may represent the total output from a lighting source or the brightness at a specific point or area. So the second bullet item is quantity or amount. And this is directly associated with the first bullet item. However, the only difference that I would like to point out is that you could measure the light at individual fixtures, or you could also limit light, the total cumulative light of all the fixtures on a parcel. So that's really only the only difference between the first two bullet items. The third item has been talked about previously during today's meeting is the color or spectrum, also referred to as the correlated color temperature. This is measured in Kelvin of any light source. The graphic in the upper right-hand side of the slide hopefully illustrates this a little bit better, where a lower Kelvin rating equates to a warmer hue of light, whereas a higher Kelvin represents the cooler towards the right-hand side of the graphic. The fourth bullet item is shielding, which seeks to limit glare and or light trespass onto neighboring properties. This can be accomplished with the housing of a fixture, where the actual fixture itself only allows light to be directed in a specific location, primarily downward. Or it could also be accomplished through exterior elements that have a non-translucent surface to again ensure that light is only directed in its intended direction. This tool is very effective at limiting unwanted light onto neighboring properties, but it should also be noted that directing light downward does not limit the reflectivity of light bouncing back upwards off of surfaces back up into the sky. The fifth bullet is placement or direction. This is also closely related to the previous item, shielding. But the note here is that the placement or location of a light also has a direct impact on potential light trespass. For example, you can have a fully shielded fixture that is, say, 20 or 30 feet above the ground, and that would cast a much greater area of light, which could be directed onto neighboring property. Whereas if that same fixture were only a few feet off the ground, obviously it would have a much more focused luminance. The sixth and final bullet on this slide is for timers and or curfew, which is a very effective method used to protect nocturnal activities, establishing a time where lights must be extinguished. Is very effective at supporting nighttime activities and astronomy.
Excuse me, Buell, Januzzi, are motion sensors also coming into fashion or not?
Yes, there are several other areas that regulate timers on motion sensors and or the direction that motion sensing light can be directed. I've seen a number of different variations to that. Some say 45 degrees, for example, but it is also of note that most motion sensing light is not qualified as fully shielded because it does allow light to be cast above the nadir, which would be the bottom of the bulb. Then also another means that I have seen other jurisdictions measure or limit motion sensing light is again by the total illuminance of the motion sensing fixture. So some jurisdictions say that there are lumen caps or foot candle caps on different types or classifications of fixtures, and oftentimes motion sensing light have their own category. And then the graphic in the bottom right. Yep, go ahead.
Robbie,
Yes.
you mentioned light hitting a surface, bouncing off and creating trespass. Dan, do you run into many complaints in regards to that? That's one part of the question. And are you going to limit the albedo of horizontal surfaces, which is counterproductive for global warming?
easy question, Rob. This is Dan. By far, our biggest complaint is light trespass, whether it's glare from the bulb, whatever, especially when we get into the residential aspects of it. Definitely have that. The second part of your question, to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure. That's kind of why we were working on the draft. I don't have the answer to that, but I'm hoping our consultants, subcommittee, and ultimately the full lighting code committee will be able to assist with that.
If you don't mind, I can sort of answer that. So this is Amy Oliver. So Rob, that's a great question. Albedo of a horizontal surface would fall slightly outside of this committee's jurisdiction. So while we could make a recommendation to the county and the city to look at that in another code, I don't think we can put that in our code. I don't think we can put that in the outdoor lighting code.
This is Clayton with the city. There are more than one way to address that type of sky glow that occurs from the reflection off of hard surfaces. Obviously, the outdoor lighting code itself wouldn't be able to mandate the color of hard surfaces. However, if the code moved towards an illuminance-based approach, you would be measuring the light in that area, both from the fixture and the reflection. So it could be possible, depending on, again, how the committee decides to move forward in measuring light and or limiting that light, because the reflectivity does have an effect on the total, say, foot candles of an area based on the total light that's shining on those surfaces.
Gil Januzzi, question, it sounds like you're implying that someone would actually measure what the illuminance is, whereas I think most of the time right now, a designer models what is going to be there. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, I would say absolutely. And also I would like to add to that there are really two sides of lighting regulation, which is the initial design and or from our perspective, the plan review process to verify that the intent of the installed lighting would meet the code. But then there's the inspection side, which can be very, very difficult, especially if special inspectors are involved or again, how that light would be regulated would require on-site measurements of the actual installed lighting.
Clayton, so this is Amy Oliver. Who's doing that inspection and measurement? In this, magic future world, if we moved toward illuminance, who is doing that measurement? How is that getting done? That's been a problem we have faced with other questions in the lighting code, like NIT limits, about who's measuring them.
This is Clayton with the city. Great question. And also I would say it's relative to the situation. So for example, new development, the city and the county both have inspection staff that verify the lighting that is installed according to the approved plan. But based on that design, that inspection might also require the services of a third-party special inspector, depending, currently the way that the code is written, it's based on total lumen output, I believe, on the site, would dictate that the services of a third party would also need to be involved in addition to the city building inspectors or lighting inspectors. However, I would like to also add that that process is associated with a permit. So when a permit is obtained, there's a plan review and inspections associated with that, and that's where the city and or the county would verify that lighting. In the case of existing or unpermitted work, it would be a different group for the city anyway, there's a separate code enforcement division that would be responsible for responding to complaints for unpermitted work and or existing non-conforming.
So I have a follow-up question for you then. So if it then involves a third party, again, sorry, this is Amy. That would mean an additional cost to those seeking a permit, right? Because they would then have to bring in that outside third party, and so they will have an additional cost in their inspection process.
The current code, this is Clayton with the city, the current code does prescribe the conditions upon which that third party agents would be necessary. And yes, that cost is in addition to the cost of the permit or so forth, and the responsibility of the permit applicant. However, if a third party is not prescribed, then the cost of the lighting inspections is part of the permit cost.
Right, I'm sorry, now I have another follow-up question. I'm sorry, this is Amy again. So, but in the case of switching to a table like Illuminance, essentially, we would end up having to prescribe everyone to that, at least in the early days. Because it would be a new measurement. And so I'm just trying to understand, right, so that I have clarity, because if we're, discussing this as subcommittee later, we need to understand all of those types of implications. And what that would mean for new businesses coming in, a new development. I have to, of course, we have to be able to answer to the stakeholders. And so that's why I'm asking those questions. So we would then be prescribing that in almost every case. Thank you.
So this is Clayton with the city.
No.
Jump in whenever you're ready. The current method of verifying compliance for city and or county staff is to verify that the fixture itself meets the plan, the approved plan. So that is to say, the city inspector is not measuring light at all, and also because the inspections occur during the day, not at night. So they're really only looking at the fixture itself and or the bulbs or luminaires to verify that what was installed is the same as what's on the approved plan. The current third-party inspection process is a nighttime inspection, which does incur additional costs because they are not only looking at the fixtures, they're also measuring light. So to move towards a model where the quantity of light is measured, it would most likely incur a third-party process so that inspection could occur at night and the actual light to be.
Exactly. Yeah, sorry, this is Amy. Thank you. That's exactly what I was trying to clarify, is that if we move to Illuminance, that necessitates a nighttime inspection on every single project. So I want to make sure everyone on the committee understands that to measure metrics in Illuminance and actually determine if the plan has been executed as approved, it would have to be at night, which is the third party cost.
This is Buell Januzzi. So that makes sense to me, but I'm wondering if our consultants, who were the ones that were floating this idea, might want to comment how they were imagining their suggested change would allow us to know what the total amount of light going up is and control it.
I'd love to comment. Charles Stone here. I've been chafing at the bit over here. A few things, a couple of comments that were made. Measurement of illuminance is not dependent upon albedo or reflectance at all. It has nothing to do. They have nothing to do with each other. That's one point.
Can you explain? This is Buell. Can you explain what the
Sure.
measurement?
Well, let me even go back another step. There are two words that get confused easily by everybody. One is luminance, starting with an L, and one is illuminance, starting with an I, illuminance. And in the slide that's on screen, intensity is luminance. Luminance always has a vector. And brightness is not a scientific term. Brightness is our human response to luminance. If I shine a flashlight in your eye, you respond to the luminance of the source. The second bullet point, quantity amount, we measure that and you can measure luminance. It's complicated. Quantity is simpler to measure. We will call it foot candles. Everybody has heard of a foot candle in the English system of measurement. In the metric system, we use the lux. They're related. Quantity, we measure that quantity. That quantity is called illuminance. That's the light falling upon a surface. And so the nature of the surface doesn't matter to illuminance. So if you drop 100 foot candles, which is a lot of light, onto a desk, the desk doesn't care whether it's a black desk or a white desk. So that's a little explanation of that. It's a little hard to get in one quick explanation, but those are important points.
Thank you. This is Buell again. What word do you like to use to describe the measurement of the amount of light that goes up and is not landing on a surface?
Oh, you would light that's going directly up from a source?
No, any light that, no matter how few or many reflections it goes, ends up going above the horizontal.
Very hard to measure, and the answer is lumens.
Lumens, but when you were proposing that we switch from lumen caps, which uses lumens, to illuminance, which doesn't.
Right.
How are we going to manage the total amount of light going?
It's an excellent question. At the moment, you have no way of verifying a site other than looking at plans. If you use...
Actually, we do. This is Buell again. We can make measurements of the night sky brightness.
Yes, but you can't really tell which side it's coming from.
Correct. But we can tell the
my parking lot or the other guy's parking lot.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. I really appreciate
So it's just imprecise and it's difficult to measure.
No, it's actually precise. It's just not able to tell you where the light came from.
Okay, fair enough. And so, but what we're interested in doing as we write a code is holding everybody accountable for the light they use on their site. Now,
so actually, we don't do that in the code. We intentionally put most of the burden on the largest producers of the light that might go up. We don't put a huge burden currently on individual families to document that they're not producing as much as a shopping mall because we know they can't produce that much. We don't make them prove.
I agree. There are two categories in my mind. There is all those individual families who live in houses, and all the commercial development, academic development, all the other development that occurs. Every single project that is not a private dwelling has a consultant who has a copy of the IES documents because they have to do their professional work, and they design the lighting for a project on a performance basis. And basically, the main reference is the best practice described in the IES document. So they're already doing that. That's already happening. No one is designing lighting for any project based on lumens, counting lumens per acre. Or that's not the way you can't do it that way because you have to design for what humans need at a doorway, a parking lot, or
committee. I'd like to know.
This is Craig. I guess we've been doing it wrong all these years. Nice thing about the way we do the lumens per acre, it's easy for the engineers to understand how to do it and to calculate how many lumens are on that 1 acre. It's 1 acre property. You know, you get a certain amount of light that you can put down on the property based upon its distance to an observatory.
Right. I understand it.
Huh?
They have to design the project first, then they have to count the lumens.
They do it in conjunction with, because, you know, most of the engineers that I worked here in Tucson, and we used a visuals lighting program, which enables the opportunity to set a foot candle level for that particular area of the property. And then Once you do that and it meets all the ISNA recommendations, then you go through and you count up the number of lumens that each fixture puts out. And we know that back in, before LED became prominent, that we were getting 70% of lumens initially out on the fixture. 30% would stay locked in that fixture. Now it's upwards of what, 95%, Dennis, now for LED?
Well, it depends on the fixture, but you're right. It can be more efficient depending on the fixtures chosen.
So Alex Zimmerman, from the nation's perspective, it's an illuminance calculation, right? It's from foot candles, right? Here, the difficulty we find from the design community is we have to thread the needle. We have to meet the lumen cap, but also try to meet the IES recommended light levels, right? So that's our difficulty. And that's why I like his recommendation, but how do you take that now and use that for different geographical locations to make that work as you get closer to the observatory?
Charles
Right.
Stone here. I just want to finish on one thought. We didn't make any recommendations yet. We've only said you should reconsider. We've suggested that you reconsider this in order to simplify it and make it more practical and also possibly get closer to what you really want. Let me give you an example. If you drive around in the foothills neighborhoods, there's not a lot of light, but a lot of it is going up because the fixtures are not shielded. You could easily require residential installation to have cut-off fixtures that go below horizontal for future construction. It's really not a hardship. And it's an approach like that. That's a performance-based approach that would be of great benefit to reducing, especially in the perimeter zones in the foothills. And I want to make one second comment. The IES recommendations, they have lighting zones. And it's quite interesting to look at those lighting zones, which are universally understood by engineers and designers who may come to Tucson to work or who already work here, as a way of regulating the amount of light as you get closer to observatories, and probably a much better understood way.
Charles, I'm gonna actually stop you right there because I know Dennis has a
Sure.
comment. I want to make sure we get back on track with our agenda because we're only one slide into Clayton's presentation and we've just got 40 minutes,
What,
about 40 minutes left.
we have a time limit?
Yeah, 2 hours.
Yeah, we're a 2-hour meeting today.
Okay.
So,
I suggest we have a longer meeting in the future.
yeah, I just want to make sure, because today is not really to do this discussion anyway. I want to make sure that the committee also has the opportunity to review these first, 3 items. And then actually have a good conversation, about it in the subcommittee, have some conversations with you, Charles. And then actually be able to come back to our next meeting with really thoughtful and meaningful comments for the public to respond to. And then some more time, make sure we get the agenda and our documents out sooner so that everyone who's here today has the opportunity to respond in a thoughtful way. What I'd like to do is just now give that to Dennis. I know you have comments. Okay. So we'll let Clayton go ahead and move on with his presentation. And then we'll move on to the other agenda items, because I know you got like 4 or 5 more slides, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Clayton with the city, and I can move through these rather quickly. I would like to remind everyone that the following examples are not intended to be a model for or suggestions to emulate. This is simply an assessment of how other cities are doing it and opportunities to consider additional factors. So the first example is Flagstaff. They regulate lighting for all new development and major additions, which exceed 25%. And that is cumulative. So adding on multiple times would accumulate that 25%. They have 2 lighting zones or areas relative to their 2 observatories or primary sensitivity areas. Slightly different than Tucson, we have more than 2 zones or areas. One other aspect that I found interesting for Flagstaff is they have 3 lighting classifications. So it is quite specifically class 1, class 2, class 3. And I've simplified those classes into essentially sales, safety, and decoration. So sales being commercial activities, car lots, things like that. Safety being walkways, driveways, pedestrian areas. And then the third category is essentially just decorative lighting, which could include landscaping or just general building illumination.
Recreation would be under sales or?
Recreation is under sales, correct. Assembly, assembly in general is under that sales category. Flagstaff also regulates by lumens per net acre and also lumen per fixture. So a little bit different than the city of Tucson. They have 2 limits based on the total lumen allowance for the property and the total lumens of each fixture. And then as was brought up before, motion sensing, they specify a maximum 5-minute timer on all motion sensing fixtures. And then for their correlated color temperature, they cap out at 2,700 Kelvin, which is in that warmer side of light. Next, we'll look at Hawaii and Honolulu. They also have 3 classifications of lighting, almost verbatim to Flagstaff. The sales, safety, and decoration are general terms for all of the items that are listed in their class 1, class 2, and class 3. They specify a curfew after 11 p.m. to sunrise. I would like to just make a general note that sunrise is a very difficult measurement for any sort of enforcement because it changes every day throughout the year. So should you go that route, you might consider a time in the morning as opposed to actual sunrise.
Time of 18-degree twilight. Which changes also with the sunrise. But with if you have light that's controlled, and increasingly lights are controlled, then that is the same challenge.
This is Clayton, agreed. I think that would also depend on whether it's using a light sensor to turn on or off the light, or if it's on an actual timer.
That's right.
They do have an exception for that curfew if bona fide business or recreational activities are taking place. They do have a holiday lighting exemption, but they don't specify what time of year or dates that holiday lighting qualifies.
It's always a holiday.
Always a holiday in Honolulu.
And then for the state, they do require shielding and curfews, but those shielding and curfews are based on the lumen output per fixture. So it varies. Honolulu goes a step further and they require mandatory full cutoff for all fixtures, but then they give an exception for existing non-conforming light that's been in existence for a set amount of time. Next, we'll go to Phoenix. This is quite possibly the loosest regulation I found. So I just wanted to point out that there are lighting regulations that may not serve the intended purpose. And this quite possibly could be one of those because they also regulate both shielding and filtration on fixture type, but filtration in this in their specific definitions could be clear plastic over the bulb. They also provide exemptions for lighting that have automatic shut off at 11 p.m. So essentially they allow, you know, massive quantities of light so long as that light turns off at 11. But they also specify that light may not shine or reflect onto adjacent residential properties. And while I appreciate the intent of this statement, I would say that that is very difficult to enforce to the specificity that is written in our code. And then finally, San Diego has a number of points that could be talked about. They limit light both fixture output and lumens per gross acre. Interestingly, I did not find clear definitions between Flagstaff's net acre or San Diego's gross acre, but the terms are different. They have a specific, two specific statements that I thought were interesting. One, may not fall onto surrounding properties or create glare hazards within public right of ways. So again, an intent to limit the light trespass and the safety issue of glare. They've got that statement. They also have a timing device specification. Here, the example where they specify 6 a.m. rather than sunrise. I thought it also interesting, though, that this regulation was only for commercial and industrial lighting for those timing devices. They limit light in 3 forms of measurements: foot candles, lumens, and wattage. The wattage, I believe, actually ties back to the state of California's energy limitations. So that plays in. I would also like to point out that our International Energy Conservation Code also has wattage limitations on light. So may want to acknowledge that. They also have 3 classifications of fixtures, but their classifications are different. They specify commercial security and decorative. So commercial and industrial rather than sales tends to have a bit of a more broad stroke than specifically outdoor sales or assembly activities. The second statement I thought was interesting is that they allow a minimum of 5,000 lumens per property, regardless of the size of the parcel, which is to say that any parcel, regardless of its acreage or percentage of acreage, is allowed that minimum quantity of light. And then their yes, sir. Yes,
Seriously? So if you had a 10-foot by 10-foot parcel, you got 5,000 lumens?
Based on the way
San
it-
Diego view.
Yeah, it's San Diego. I like that one.
In a sense, so that correlates with what the energy code does on allowable wattage for outdoor lighting, because you are allowed in your lighting zone a fixed amount. Zone 2, I think you can have 400 watts. Doesn't matter whether you got 10 acres or 10 square feet, you get 400 watts.
It's good to know, this is Craig. It's good to know that there are other municipalities using lumens per acre. And I'm pretty sure since it really got started in Flagstaff and Tucson here, that San Diego's came from here with their terminology as far as lumens per acre. So I think from an engineering standpoint, it's easier to qualify that than the foot candles, because if you're measuring the foot candles and you're talking about light trespass, you're also going to have to do a vertical measurement at the property line, which is going to increase the fees to the end user from having to do that. And I just wanted to make sure that I understand that Charles has said that he hasn't recommended anything to us at all. This is just simply his ideas. Is that correct, Charles? You still with us?
Charles Stone here. Yeah, we haven't made any recommendations. We just read all the stakeholder comments and looked at your existing code very carefully and applied our experience and understanding what's going on around the country and understanding Tucson's special case, and come up with those initial responses, which we summarize in the 3 points. So that's where we've gone so far. I would comment that I think you'll see everybody moving away from the lumens per acre because it's unmanageable from a design and measurement standpoint. And, you know, basically in most jurisdictions, you supply photometric plots, they're called, to show what your design is going to produce, and that can easily be checked. I don't quite understand the concern about additional cost. I don't particularly see that because we do all this, everyone does this now. So enough in the weeds, but
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Charles. So, I don't know if anyone on this committee is aware of anywhere, else that is using illuminance, as the measure in the lighting code. So, if I may ask of Clayton and Dan, for this committee's sake, I would like to see 5 examples of comparable jurisdictions that are using illuminance. So not somewhere that's 10 times our size, or not somewhere that's 10 times smaller than us. So we can't have 100,000 people when we have over 1 million people. So comparable jurisdictions that are using illuminance, and so that we can then go investigate how that has worked for them. So that we know whether it's a positive or negative impact on their lighting pollution. Okay, Buell.
Bill, apologies, I know you want to move this along, but I don't think we gave Charles the chance to explain how, with an illuminance approach, you know the total amount of light going up. How do you know what that is?
It's not going up, it's coming out of the fixture.
I know, that was coming out of the pictures. What I'm asking is, how do you translate using the IES guidelines to knowing how much light you're going to have going up?
It's inconsequential, both instances. Light reflects, it goes up. You're not gonna be able
But
to measure that.
the lumen caps, the illuminance is on a installation by installation basis. As, are you meeting the safety guidelines, as I understand it? And this is why I'm asking the question. How do you set a limit?
but,
We don't on the luminance, I mean, it's based upon foot candles, measuring. to the
So we're
foot
just
candle.
hoping that the IES guidelines were designed without
Give Charles a chance.
sky brightness in mind to lead to a good result.
well, Charles here, worldwide, the new emphasis on dark skies is having a big impact on everybody's approach to exterior lighting. So having said that, the idea is to use as little light as possible. And I think we didn't get there yet on this in our discussions here, but what we would want to seek to do is have Tucson's performance view of the performance metrics be as stringent as possible, so that you're basically insisting and guaranteeing that everybody's using the fewest lumens possible to achieve what is necessary. You've got to satisfy fire codes, public safety codes, aesthetics, all sorts of.
Thank you. I now understand what you're suggesting, and it sounds like a great topic for the subcommittee. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you.
Committee, does anyone else have questions for Clayton about the presentation? All right, thank you, Clayton, for doing that. And as I mentioned, I would still really like to see that if there are comparable jurisdictions using illuminance, so that we can intelligently consider that when we convene as a subcommittee.
This is Clayton. We'll do our best to find 5 comparable cities that are
Any-
similar in size. That also regulate outdoor light successfully.
Well, you don't have to do that part. We'll do that part.
Okay.
Just that are measuring in illuminance rather than lumens per acre.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so our next item on our agenda is our future meeting schedule, so if we can, I'll kind of open your calendar, Buell.
Yeah.
Everyone else just chill out.
To start with that, what's our goal for completion?
That's a great question.
Now that we've introduced all this new information.
This is Clayton with the city. I would highly recommend that we reconvene the Outdoor Lighting Code Committee on a monthly basis moving forward so that we can continue forward progress rather than specifying an end date on when we need to complete. I would recommend we continue meeting on a regular basis moving forward now that we have some additional resources to assist.
Right? do we still have a goal of being complete to roll this into the other 2024 code adoption, or are we gonna go off schedule for that?
In a perfect world, that would be ideal, to complete by July 1st so that it lines up with the building code implementation. But, you know, I would say from my personal perspective, speaking personally here, I would rather it be right than quick. So, you know, I feel that we need to progress at the rate necessary to, come to consensus.
I guess I'm asking, this is Dennis, I'm asking the question because otherwise would there need to be maybe an interim solution? Because I think to really address these other things that are completely different than the way our code's working right now is gonna take a considerable amount of time to get consensus of the committee and get consensus from stakeholders. And, but I believe that we actually have an urgent problem right now because every day, good light sources with respect to maintaining a dark sky are getting ripped out. They're being replaced with bad light sources that are hurting the dark sky. And I think there's some urgency to do something about that.
This is Rob. Dennis, is that on retrofits?
Every single day, somebody takes down an HPS installation and replaces it with, if they get permits with a 3000K LED installation, they end up with higher light levels than they had before, and they're still code compliant. However, I believe that more lighting is replaced without permits than with permits. And I believe many of those are going in with cooler light sources than what's allowed under the code right now.
I think that's them not knowing. I don't think it's intentional. So they don't know the code, therefore they're putting those lights in.
Yeah, and the idea that a design professional is designing all this lighting and all that is not what happens. So I think there's some urgency that we get something to address what's happening because our legacy sources every single day are getting ripped out, and I think what's going in now is not achieving the goals of protecting the observatories.
And this is Craig, and that's what our design as a committee was initially focused on is let's get to the LED problem. Let's figure out what to do. Let's get it in as soon as possible. What we're doing now is change the whole gambit. Instead of being able to do that right away, we're going to be spending more months now trying to determine if illuminance is the way to go versus luminous breaker.
This is Amy. Dennis, is the solution that we have an interim, or your idea is that we have an interim change to the code, or that we do something for educational purposes in the meantime?
I believe that educational purposes are completely worthless. I believe that people will do what they want to do with their own property. And the people that want to do the right thing and get permits are going to do it. And the people that just want to call somebody to change out my lights or to do it themselves are going to continue to do it. I don't think education will make any difference at all. That's my personal.
Do you think an interim change to the code would make that difference?
I think it would help because it would, at least for the portion of lighting that gets changed that's being done with permits, it would make it better than is happening right now.
May I suggest, because we probably can't sort that out today, that we, as the subcommittee, convene on that and then meet with Dana and Clayton and determine if that will make a reasonable interim step and then to get us over the finish line on the bigger project. Go ahead, Buell.
This is Buell. I'm enthusiastic about the subcommittee meeting and getting lots of work done. But I also think the rest of us probably need to meet with you a little bit more frequently than we have been the last few years, because I think in order to get all the stakeholders information to the consultants, if the consultants are going to be working with the subcommittee, it's going to need that kind of a meeting. So I think you need two series. Unfortunately, I think you need two increased cadences of meetings, one of the subcommittee, but also the full committee.
So are you, this is Amy, are you comfortable with monthly, or do you think?
I'm
the full
comfortable with
committee
monthly,
needs to be-
especially if we can meet, and this is a question to the city and county. If we can meet when the public can more easily participate, the turnout is not that high today. I know the notice only went out 24 hours. But most people that we want to hear from also have jobs, so they can't come during the workday. Is it possible for us to schedule some of the meetings either at 5:30 or on a weekend or some other time?
Not for 3 hours.
I'm sorry,
Not for 3 hours like you desire.
there's a limit on how long a meeting can be,
At 5:30? Well, hell yeah.
maybe on your participation.
Are you bringing
Is there
it up?
is there an actual limit in the open meeting law?
No, I believe there's not a code limit on that, but for the people who will come, there might be limitations. Even stakeholders.
What I'm advocating, and you guys decide what you want to do, is that you have a diversity of times. If we only met on Mondays at 9 AM, there's some people that will never be able to participate.
I agree with you. This is Amy again. I agree with you. I think that we can talk about diversity so that we have, one of our meetings is on, right now it's Wednesday, it was 9 AM, and then the next meeting is at a different time. To make it more accessible. And I think that is, we've talked about that before as well. I'm pointing right at Clayton because he's looking at me, not for a particular reason, but we've done that in the past. As well, because we want to make it more accessible. Otherwise, we do not get the contributions from the stakeholders that we need to build consensus, and people do feel left out of this process. And that it's not accessible to them. And if we want to be able to move forward, we are gonna have to have a little bit of a balance there. If I can put that, then what I will do is put that back on city and county to provide us with some potential dates where we could do mornings versus nights. That will make sense because I know that's also a challenge for you. So we need to be aware that that's a challenge for city and county staff to be able to make that accommodation to have a meeting at night. So if I can put that to you and see if you guys can sort out what might make sense and be possible. I think we would all appreciate that very much.
And then I think the subcommittee, we need to agree that we need to meet at least once between every full committee
I
meeting.
think-
And it'd be better if we could meet more frequently than that.
I think twice. We'll sort that out.
Not if we can do monthly meetings. If we're gonna do like, you wants to do it on a monthly
I didn't
basis,
say monthly, I said it more frequent.
or more, okay, well, I think maybe somebody said a monthly basis. But if, at least in the existing term, the beginning here, because, if we're gonna solve this, we need to actually spend more time, and I like the idea of doing a subcommittee in between that.
Yeah,
And subcommittee work can spill into the main meeting too. I mean, if we've got issues that we're close to a resolution on something, and let's just bring everybody in and discuss that at the main meeting.
This is Clayton. We will be sure to have agenda items on the next full committee meetings for subcommittee reports. Now that we're having the subcommittee meet again, in the interim, as well as review of, previous meeting minutes. So two agenda items will be recurring on your agendas moving forward, in addition to whichever agenda items you choose.
Go ahead. Phil.
So something that we did for the 2012 effort was we actually had some workshops that were public. They were not mandatory. They were public because that way we could have more than 3 of the committee members there, but they were just informational sessions. So we actually brought in, you might remember ADOT came in and told us about their concerns because 2012 code was the first time we brought street lighting in. And we had a chance for people to talk and hear without actually trying to write any code. I think now that we have a consultant, it'd be really great if they could participate in meetings like that with the public and with us. But if it's in a 2-hour meeting, it's gonna be really constrained. So
Well, this is Craig, according to that contract that I read, they're here, the consultant's here for another 30 days.
oh, it's only another 30 days.
Well, this is Dan with Pima County. We realize that this will take more than 30 days. We are working on amending the contract to extend their time of their services.
So my main point, I would want to include the consultants if we still have them, but if we don't, my main point is the idea that In the past, we've done tours of the city to actually see lighting that lighting engineers and other people think is great lighting, meets IES standards, et cetera. And see examples that are bad. And it makes it easier when we're all talking about details in the code, if we have some common experience of seeing things. So I'd like to suggest we try and do that again. It's been a while since we've done that.
This is Amy. I'll follow up with you on that. And then I'll follow up with Clayton and Dan and we'll sort that out. Lots of action items to
Robbie, couple comments, questions. Is there something in the code that regulates refixturing or relamping light poles, or how do you control that currently? Question number one.
There's something in the code.
There is something in the code.
It's kind of all over the place, a couple of different areas, so you have to, it's based upon the circumstance in which you have.
I'm trying to think if there really are specific words that addresses, maintenance and replacement.
This is Amy. We could probably clarify it. It's in there, but it's a lot of pages and I don't think we say the word refixture. So it might be useful if we consider some very specific language to that effect.
Question one. Question two, you brought up ADOT. I know on the recent round of comments, PDOT weighed in with some of their concerns. Street lighting is a big concern, I think, for the city and the county. A lot of fatalities. We talked about flora and fauna and beans, but they talk about people too that get run over and hit by cars. And how we're going to, perhaps by limiting foot candles, what sort of impact that's going to have. So I think having somebody from PDOT or ADOT come in to share their concerns with us, I think we should all listen to that, because I don't do much street lighting. I'm touching some now, but it is sort of a different, it's by the feds. There's different rules. Charles, you might want to comment on that. I don't think all the IASNA guidelines are for roadways. Are there?
Yeah. This is Bill. That's the reason I mentioned them, is we brought them in 2012 to make sure we did hear their concerns. And what I remember, but I'd like to find out now that it's more than a decade later, whether it's still true, is that safety is a function of not just lighting, but speed limits, speed limit enforcement, alcohol abuse enforcement.
For sure, but
adequacy
lighting's a
of
fact.
Absolutely,
Okay.
and that means you don't just bring in ADOT, you bring in all the experts that you need to make sure that our community is safe.
Charles Stone here, just responding to that. Two things come to mind. Your street lighting is actually, in my opinion, I don't have data on this other than flying over the city in an airplane. The biggest contributor to sky glow is street lighting.
Absolutely.
And that's number one. The second comment is street lighting is really not in the purview of what we've been charged to work on in this code, because it's a separate, I believe, it either is or it probably should be a separate, I'll leave that to all of you, a separate area of code. Thank you.
Dennis, let me step in on that. Chapter 8 regulates illumination in right of way. It is the only part of the code that the requirements are based on illuminance. We have maximum illuminance levels for expressway of 1.4 foot candles, major roads 1.5 foot candles, collector roads 1.0 foot candles, local roads 0.4 foot candles in area E3. And lighting is prohibited on local roads outside of area E3. So we've got an illuminance regulation in the code right now, pretty simple, but it's there, and we are regulating the amount of light therefore that can be used on public right of ways. Chapter 8.
Thank you, Dennis, for pointing that out, especially as we're saying it's our biggest problem. I think those are two important comments to pair together.
This is great. I mean, I don't think that all the street lighting that the city and county has put in is all full cutoff. What you're seeing flying over Tucson is the reflectance of those LED lights going back into the sky. It's not coming directly out of the fixture. So Charles, if you're seeing that as you fly into Tucson, all those fixtures are full cutoff in the city, the county, Raytheon, all those, people were putting in. Flatlands, full cutoff LEDs.
Thank you, Craig. So I'm gonna actually bring us all back to the agenda item. If you gentlemen don't mind, which is our future meeting schedule. So we'll work on dates. Clayton and Dan have that under control. We'll work on what the agenda is going to look like, which should include, as we know, a report from the subcommittee. We'll work on dates to meet with the subcommittee and include you on that as well. So if we don't have additional comments on the meeting schedule, is there anyone on the committee with additional thoughts on the meeting schedule, or Clayton or Dan? Okay, then what I'd like to do now is open that call to the audience. Oh, go ahead, Angie.
It's not accurate that street lighting is the biggest contributor to Tucson Sky Glow.
Sorry, can we just let me open the public comment first?
This is the
Okay.
public comment.
Yeah, I haven't actually opened it.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I thought you had a comment about the schedule. So if we don't have any comments about the schedule, further comments, then we'll now move to the public comment. So it looks like that first one is from John Barentine. If you can go ahead and start that over. Sorry about that.
It's not accurate that street lighting is the biggest contributor to Tucson Sky Glow. We measured it in 2019-20. Two publications independently determined that the fraction of total city light emissions from street lighting was only about 20%.
And who is this? I'm sorry.
John Barentine.
He used to work for Dark Sky International.
Yeah, no, I just
Okay.
didn't hear.
Okay.
Thanks. John, what is the biggest single component that you measured?
We aren't able to determine what that is. All we could say is what fraction was constituted by the street lighting. Beyond that, it would be speculation. We don't know.
So I appreciate the correction. I'll say what I was trying to say was it's a large identifiable component that can be regulated with a single approach compared to other things which are more diverse, but I appreciate the correction.
We have a
Mr. Chairman,
comment.
you'd have a minute back.
Go ahead, Dr. Green.
Hey, Figure Green, I'm an astronomer at the University of Arizona and convener of the Arizona Astronomy Consortium, which is an informal group of all the professional observatories in the state. So first of all, we want to say how grateful we are that the circumstances that were delaying progress have been overcome so that this process is now rolling again, because it's really important. Secondly, to sharpen up this question of the impact of local astronomy. Southern Arizona hosts the world's largest telescope and 10% of all the world's largest telescopes. So it's not just by number, these mountaintops are actually critical locations, and there is continuing major investment in those facilities on the basis that this good faith effort continues to try to protect the asset of the Sonoran Desert sky. So for that, we're very grateful for this progress. Just a couple of technical comments for consideration of the committee and the consultant going forward. In order to limit the sky brightness around the observatories themselves, there's a well-known effect of 1 over r squared, that 1 over the distance to the mountaintop. And so the notion of the overlay lighting zones was to have serious restriction right near the telescope and then relaxing that as you move away from that mountain. And it's done in sort of a coarse way. The notion of lumens per acre in trying to implement that is really one attempt to meet what I call an integral constraint. What we care about is the total amount of light being emitted even toward the ground in the near vicinity of these telescopes. So what lumens per acre accomplishes as an approach is sort of an equalizer, saying that no one property can have a huge amount of light on it, because then without a public policy statement saying we sum all the light in everybody's property. We just have unlimited growth. So without some kind of integral constraint, the next best thing was a constraint per property on total amount of light being emitted. So I think we're open to creative solutions, but if we let go of any integral constraint, then we've just got growth without limit for the lighting right around the telescope, and that's what we'd like to avoid. The other piece, which is again a technical comment, is that as Dennis pointed out, the change in lighting technology relative to the 2012 code has it that now everybody's solid state lights have a much broader spread in the spectrum of light that actually is emitted. And so that makes human visibility much easier, and you need less of that broad spectrum light to achieve the same visibility as the lighting lumens totals that were given in 2012. So our latest input as comments to the lumens table was the notion that without changing the visibility in any way, you can and must reduce the number of lumens coming out of a solid state fixture just to equal what used to come out of a high pressure sodium lamp. So it looks like we're trying to tighten the clamps. We're just trying to hold even rather than having, you know, a huge increase in the amount of light. And high pressure sodium is, as you remember, was sort of pinky orange. Now there's a lot of light coming out of the blue and green where the sky used to be completely dark. So trying to counter those two effects while maintaining the same visibility was our goal in some numerical revision to the lumens table. So thinking about those two sources would be fine. And in the end, I'm happy to pass around my telephone. There's a drone photo, and at least for the first half of the night, all the unshielded lighting is coming from practice fields and parks and things like that. So it's quite a sobering view of Tucson these days. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Who is that one from?
Paula,
Sorry, can you go ahead and read that one out? Do you mind?
is there any connection between outdoor light code areas and the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan maps? If not, is that under consideration? And thank you for taking the question.
There's no
I
connection.
don't think so.
This is Amy to answer Paula. Right now, there's no direct connection between those. Do we have an overlay for that? Dan and Clayton, do you know in the GIS? Is there an overlay?
Can be.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with this.
Okay. Paula, that's a great question. So to answer you again, there is no direct connection between the two at this time, but that's a very interesting point that you've raised. And I'm taking note of it, and we're going to investigate whether we have the right overlays to see if we have a way to connect the two.
Christopher Poirier, answer generally yes.
Chris is the planning official.
Oh, great.
And Dan, can you hear me? This is Tom. I'll make a comment. The regulation is, as you get further out from the city and closer to the mountains, there's more protected lands, which limits the amount of disturbance. So it's through the amount of disturbance and regulation that would occur further out from town. So therefore it would have an impact on the amount of lighting, as opposed to close in the town where 100% of properties could easily be developed. Once you get closer to the mountains, we could be as limited as 20% or even less than that. So there is an informal kind of regulation tied through disturbance through the CLS.
Thank you, Chris.
That was Tom.
Oh, Tom, sorry. Sorry, Tom.
That's okay. I don't need credit for anything.
Hey, Chris, that's Tom. I was taking notes and my brain shut off. Okay. Do we have any additional comments in there?
That's the one we just went through. Thank you, and then. Who is that? Oh, Paula. Yes, understood, there is a coincidental link, but wonder if additional codes could be added to SDCP areas.
Thanks, Paula. Again, this is Amy, and I've taken a note here for the subcommittee to look at where those overlays connect. So we'll follow up on that.
Amy, this is Tom Drzgowski again. Can I just make one comment that we've talked about internally? One of the big things we've talked about is that most of the complaints and issues that we run into with citizens have to do with unshielded lighting. We never get complaints about La Encantada, the shielded lights in their parking lots. It's always has to do with unshielded lights that neighbors put up, some which are permitted and some which are not. And it's just one of the things that we think should be a high priority in the rewrite, which would probably have positive impacts on astronomy. And it's just one comment that we've talked about over the last couple of months internally here at Pima County.
Thanks, Tom. That's it's important to hear that, and we've heard that a couple of times today. And so I think we have a lot to think about, and obviously also Charles's team has identified that as well. So we'll make it a top priority.
Yeah, unshielded is just one of the big issues for us. And I think limiting or reducing or totally eliminating is a huge positive.
Do we have any other questions or comments in the room or online? Oh, it looks like we have some more online.
Do they want to speak?
No, he has a comment. I'll read it if you want. This is Buell reading Emilio Balco's comment. 2 comments. The lumens per acre has worked for a long time to decouple growth in Tucson with SkyGlow. Switching to illuminates should be considered very carefully. Could we also get the announcements for the meetings like we used to about 1 week in advance? And this is Buell. I see Clayton nodding yes, and I know
Yes.
I would like it faster than that.
So both points, Cleve?
So just speaking to the meeting notices, meeting materials, one of the primary intents of the agenda item for future meeting schedule is to start to plan out future meetings so that we can get greater participation.
Thank you, Clayton, for the clarification. So I see we have another question from Paula here. I'll let you guys read it because I'm kind of far away from the screen and glasses are helpful, but only sort of.
So she said, I have noticed that there is no option on city code enforcement complaint for. Okay, I'm sorry, on city code enforcement complaint form to complain about light trespass, shielding, etc.
This is Clayton. So it sounds like that's a direct suggestion for the city of Tucson's code enforcement, potentially Pima County's code enforcement complaint forms. We'll be sure to pass that along.
Thank you, Clayton. Okay, anybody else in the room? Do we have any additional comments or questions? Oh, sure, Buell.
Well, do we need to help with the schedule? Like we have, everybody seems to sign up to more frequent meetings, but do we need to actually? Or are you gonna work with them?
I think maybe Doodle has seemed to be really useful.
Sounds great.
For making that happen. And I think what we need them to do first is find out what the restrictions are on city and county employees for nighttime. Because I know that's really challenging. So I want to make sure that they have a minute to figure that part out and then move forward.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so do we have? Oh, look, it looks like Chris or Tom just said that they have a lighting complaint meeting tomorrow. So, in the county. So good to hear. So, so that's always encouraging to know that we're seeing progress, in enforcement. And complaints as well. So if we have no additional, comments or questions, from online or in the room, then we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting. I'll make- Okay.
A second.
You have a second? Second, okay, any objections? Okay, then meeting is adjourned.
Yes. So my thanks. One of the things that.
Yeah. it's-